Hi, this is Deboki, and today I want to talk about love triangles. I feel like love triangles are this kind of weird trope where they instigate a lot of negative feelings, including in me, but they are also still really popular. They appear in a lot of books and a lot of TV shows, so I kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit today and kind of some of how I've perceived love triangles over time, how they kind of manifest differently in different genres. I think YA is probably the genre, at least of books, that's most popular or most well known when it comes to love triangles. So I just wanted to explore this dichotomy between why they're both so popular and so reviled, and also look at their different manifestations and maybe even start to think about what makes a good love triangle versus a bad one. Before I start, I want to note that this is going to be a very heterocentric discussion. Pretty much all of the love triangles that I'm going to be discussing today are like straight kind of love triangles, but if you do have examples of non-straight love triangles, primarily straight love triangles, I would be really interested to hear more about that, so please do let me know. I think I first started seeing love triangles in the anime and manga that I would read and watch when I was younger. The one that I think of the most is Sailor Moon, and I think the love triangles in Sailor Moon are maybe a little bit less formal than what people think of most of the time. They're a little bit more like this character is totally in love with this other character, but they're also attracted to other characters as well. But kind of in my young 8 to 10-year-old mindset, where the only ideas of romantic love that I knew about came from, like, I guess Disney movies, or at least like fictional romantic love, where Disney movies where, you know, there's one Prince Charming for every princess. Even that was kind of like weird to me. I wasn't like super into those kinds of stories, even if they were like not really a big deal, just because I was like, no, like, you love this person, you can't love anybody else, or you can't even think anybody else is pretty. But I was also like 8 at the time, so I didn't really know anything. And I think now that I'm older, I kind of appreciate it. I've also noticed that there's kind of a lot of interesting things in Sailor Moon about gender and sexuality that are a little bit more fluid than, you know, a lot of your standard love triangles. While I think the love triangles in Sailor Moon are really more of a realistic, just like you love someone, you also think someone else is pretty, and they're not really used to fuel tension too much. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum is something else that I would watch when I was younger, which is soap operas. I mean, soap operas, I feel like it's obvious. Like, love triangles serve a very clear purpose, which is to bring out tension and extend the, like, how long it takes for whatever couple to get together because there's somebody else in the way. One that I think of the most is, I guess, Passions. I think because I watched it, must have watched it during the summer. I don't really know, because I think I was like pretty young when Passions was on TV. But the main like love triangle in Passions is Teresa, Ethan, and Gwen. And Teresa is this half Mexican, half Irish kind of poor girl who falls in love with Ethan, who's kind of like richer and isn't like engaged, I guess, or in a relationship with the like rich white blonde girl Gwen. And like over the course of all the seasons of Passions, like a lot of like shenanigans happens to tear Teresa and Ethan apart, bring them back together, but tear them apart over and over and over again. I did not watch Passions to the end, but I did do like a quick Wikipedia read before I wrote up kind of what I wanted to talk about in this video, and I was just like amazed by just how much shit that happens. Like, I mean, I knew it was a soap opera, but even still. Basically, by the end of the series, sorry if this is a spoiler if you were planning to watch all of this like multi-year long soap opera, Teresa and Ethan get together. And I think this is kind of a love triangle in its purest form, which is basically to instigate drama. I think in a lot of stories, not just soap operas, but, you know, TV shows, movies, books, everything, there's this idea that once the central romance of the story resolves itself, there's nothing exciting about it anymore, which is not something that I generally agree with, but I think is a principle that's often applied. You know, you watch like any CW show, or even like a more like critically renowned drama, you know, the central romances are often kind of prolonged for as long as possible, because once the characters get together, you don't necessarily have any idea of what to do with them. It's not as exciting as watching them kind of circle each other and try to get with each other and face different challenges along the way. The downside for this to me, especially when it comes to love triangles, is that something, you know, like the soap opera Passions, where there's Teresa and Ethan who are clearly meant to be together, and Gwen, who, from what I remember and kind of what I was reading, is like very much the evil outsider who's like tearing them apart. It gets to a point where not only is Gwen a rival, she's so like nefarious and evil that it's like, well, why does Ethan even like her? And this is something I've thought about a bit, especially in relation to Taylor Swift songs. So the ones that I think about in particular when it comes to Taylor Swift are You Belong With Me, which is the one that has this sort of infamous music video where Taylor Swift is playing both the nerdy girl ideal and the like mean girl rival who is like trapped the main guy in her snares. And the other song is Speak Now, which basically she wants to crash this guy's wedding so that she can claim him away and save him from this bridezilla. In both of these songs, Taylor Swift's narrator, or if you want to, herself, they're basically set up as the ideal, right? Like the other girl, whether it's in You Belong With Me or Speak Now, like there's something about her that has ensnared the guy, like has somehow like deceived him or something. And Taylor Swift is so pure, or her character is so pure that she's gonna like, she's the girl that the guy is meant to be with. I feel like when I listen to those songs, it's kind of like, well, maybe the guy just wants to be with that girl. Like maybe he does like that bridezilla girl. Maybe the guy is also terrible. Maybe the reason why he likes terrible people is because he's also a terrible person. I guess the question is, like, if this girl is so evil, then what does the guy see in her? Like, what is the point of that relationship? I don't know, I just find that kind of a hard thing to reconcile a lot of the time. Like, I know that sometimes people will deceive people into relationships. Sometimes it can be a much worse situation where someone is abused into a relationship. In the case of a Taylor Swift song, I don't think it's like that. I think the guy just likes the girl because, I don't know, he does. Another thing that I think is interesting about these Taylor Swift songs, as well as that Passions love triangle, is how they kind of reflect the difference in love triangles if the person at the center of the love triangle is a guy. So like if it's two girls after one guy versus two guys after one girl. When it comes to guy-centered love triangles, I think the most famous one is Archie, Betty, and Veronica. So much so they have their own TV tropes page, which I found really helpful when I was kind of researching ideas for this video. And at the core of the Betty, Veronica, Archie love triangle is the idea that Betty and Veronica are actually kind of archetypes of different types of femininity. We all know that the best way to set up archetypes of femininity is by hair color, brunette versus blonde, always the best way. Even Taylor Swift does this. In the case of Archie, I don't think Betty or Veronica are really set up as necessarily ideals, but they are a way to pit these different archetypes against each other in, of course, the grand pursuit of male attention. This isn't really too dissimilar, I think, from Passions, except that there isn't necessarily a clear morality associated with Betty or Veronica. So how does this differ, at least in my opinion, from lady-centric triangles? So I think, like I said earlier, the main function of love triangles, more than anything in any story, is to instigate drama, right? Like the goal is to carry on the story for as long as possible. I love Korean dramas, and you can see this all the time in there as well. I mean, these are basically soap operas again, so it totally makes sense. Popular shows like Coffee Shop Prince and My Love from the Star, they have different forms of love polygons, some that border on Shakespearean. These love triangles can sometimes lead to what's called second lead syndrome, where basically the alternative guy, the guy who the main girl doesn't end up with, is kind of just as appealing, or in some cases even more appealing than the main guy, whether it's because the main guy is actually kind of an asshole or because the second lead just has a lot of charisma. Sometimes both. I think the other purpose in general when it comes to lady-centric love triangles is to establish desirability, and I think this is especially true in a lot of stories where where the main protagonist, she has this kind of awkward heroine turned super sexy capable character kind of trope attached to her, where maybe in the first chapter she's like super clumsy and then she gains superpowers, or I don't know, she gets this really cool job, or she meets super sexy guy. Like through some turn of events she becomes increasingly attractive. I think in those cases love triangles are a way to show kind of the change in her attractiveness or her appeal over time, because not only is she attracting like one guy, she's gotten two guys to like her, so that means it can't be a fluke. I think the other thing that can happen in lady-centric triangles, and something that I was thinking about a lot, that actually was the reason why I wanted to make this video, is that the love triangle actually starts to reflect some broader theme or choice in the story. And I think this is especially true of love triangles set in teenage stories, which is why I think they're especially common in YA novels. So basically what I mean is that the guys aren't just love interests, they're kind of like these personifications or manifestations of some larger dilemma that the protagonist is feeling. The one that I always think of the most when it comes to this is the Hunger Games. Basically, Peeta and Gale they're not just these two guys that Katniss is choosing between, but they also represent some greater sense of how she's processing the world. And I know this triangle isn't necessarily popular with everyone. I actually kind of like it because it's one of the few YA love triangles that I like, because I actually feel like it really suits Katniss. She's so passive and pragmatic. Like, she has this weird combination of the two that for some reason to me it makes total sense that she would be like kind of just waffling between two guys based on what needs they fulfill. For her, Gale represents a lot of anger and a willingness to fight, so it totally makes sense that she's really into him in the beginning of Catching Fire, where she's, you know, very bitter. She's just come out of her first Hunger Games, and again in Mockingjay, where she's like trying to like build that urge to fight, and it's really starting to take a hold of her. It totally makes sense that she's into Gale at those points. Meanwhile, the times that she's into Peeta, it's really again because she needs him at those moments. I think he's actually a little bit more complicated. In Catching Fire, in the beginning of Catching Fire, being with him actually is more representative of capitulating to the Capitol and saying like, yeah, I'll follow along with this romance storyline that you want me to take part of. So where she is at that time, it makes sense that she doesn't want to be with him no matter what his personality is like. And rejecting him is kind of a way for a traumatized Katniss to rebel against Snow in particular, except of course that she reaches a point where she realizes that she has none of the power that she wants to actually have to be able to make her own choices. By the time we get to Mockingjay, one of the guys, I forget who, actually notes that to the other that Katniss is going to end up with whoever she decides it suits her needs, like that she really is operating in this kind of pragmatic way. And that stays true to the end. I think Pete and Gale each have their own characteristics, and at their core what they represent to Katniss are different ways of coping with the upheaval around them. By the end, I mean, Gale's actions ultimately rule himself out, but it's not just that. Peeta is actually what Katniss needs. Like, this is what she says. When it comes to kind of healing herself, his softness and his personality is kind of what's soothing for her. And this kind of guy as representation of two choices thing comes up a lot in YA. I think I've read it in dystopians like Matched, where the love triangle again represents a willingness to like capitulate to the government or make your own choices. In fantasy and paranormal books like Nightshade, the Grisha trilogy, and Snow Like Ashes, I feel like this love triangle happens as well. In those cases, I think what the choices are, or kind of what the main character is deciding between, is kind of being normal and whatever it is that's starting to set her apart from the people around her. So basically in these love triangles, there's a guy who's like normal, like he doesn't have special powers, at least as far as the characters know, and there's the other guy who has something else in common with the main character, like something that before started to feel like it was setting, or something that, whatever it is that distinguishes the girl from everyone else, this guy shares it in common with her. For example, the Darkling and Alina, they're both aligned in the way that their powers work, and it's something that very much brings them together, no matter what her feelings about him actually are. I think this operates as well in Nightshade or Snow Like Ashes, where the love triangle is kind of divided along lines of like normalcy versus like power in some way. This is different from that Betty Veronica dichotomy that I was referring to earlier, because while the guys do represent some kind of distinct choice, they're not necessarily rooted in archetypes of masculinity. I think the ones who come closest are Peta and Gale, where Peta is feminized in a lot of way, both in his occupation and kind of the reference to him like as being sort of like flowers, as well as Katniss constantly saving him, while Gale is very overtly aggressive in a way that, you know, seems very much representative of masculinity. And I think it's interesting that given that difference between them, that Katniss chooses the one who's kind of more soft and maybe less stereotypically male. It makes sense that to me that this trope is common in YA, because I think in general when it comes to being a teenager, it feels like you have so many choices that you need to make, so why wouldn't your romantic interests also be reflective of some broader crisis that you're facing? But I do also think that it can be tough to execute. When it's done well, the guys are still well developed enough that you can justify their presence beyond just the tension that they bring. So you have to give a reason for why the character is drawn to both of them. And to me, it can't just be like, oh, they represent these two different things that the character is feeling, because it's like, well, there's a number of guys who could do that, and if one of them is terrible, why should the character be interested in him at all? I think that's what makes love triangles so frustrating. It's one thing to pull a Sailor Moon and just be like, oh, she's in love with this person and also thinks other people are pretty, like, that's one thing. But when you start to use love triangles for the sake of drama without fleshing out why the guy or girl would be interested in these different people, then no one really comes off looking good, I think. And I think writers struggle with this because you also don't want to bring in two really good options and then leave one of them with an unhappy ending. I think that's something that it's kind of like that second lead syndrome that I think you can get in K-dramas sometimes, where like you also like this other guy and you're like, where is your happy ending? I never read Twilight, but I guess one way to do it is to have him like creepily imprint on his original love interest daughter. Yeah, I mean, I don't have like necessarily a classification on what's a good love triangle and what's a bad love triangle. It's sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't. But yeah, do you have very strong feelings either way? Are there ones that have stood out more for you than other ones? Do you agree with the way that I've kind of broken down the way that love triangles manifest along different lines of gender and different types of genre or different types of media? Yeah, I'm really interested in to hear more. Also, by the way, I've kind of trying to start using my Goodreads account more. I'm planning to do more written reviews, so please add me on there if you're there so we can start to talk some more about books. I have also set up an Instagram for my book specific like things in life, so feel free to add me there as well. Yeah, bye.